News 24 Editors Table. And tonight we're going to talk about a company that South African taxpayers really love to hate. And that is, of course, SAA. Collectively, we've all contributed about 30-odd billion rand to SAA over the past decade or so, and we didn't get much in return. So 2 weeks ago, the Department of Public Enterprises announced a new deal that would see a private consortium take control of SAA, and we should all be happy about that. But instead, that deal has been controversial, and tonight we're going to discuss why and whether the transaction is actually in the best interest of the country. So with me tonight is the political analyst and author Ralph Matega, who recently wrote an excellent opinion piece on SAA, and I would really urge you to go seek it out. It's published on News 24, of course. My colleague, Fin24 Deputy Editor Ahmed Arif, and Fin24 journalist Corin Smith, and of course we're joined by you. So we would encourage the News 24 subscribers to post their comments and questions in the Q&A. And if you're not a subscriber yet and want to join in the conversation next time, be sure to subscribe to News 24. So, Corin, I'm going to start with you because you have been following SAA very closely for many years. Can you give us a brief potted history about what went wrong at SAA and where it found itself before this new deal was announced?
Okay, so in rough sort of a rough timeline, I would say that it seemed that the airline did pretty okay and made profits in general up to about 2012. And it sort of coincided then with the arrival of a certain chairperson whose name is Ms. Dudumyeni. She was a director since 2009, then became the chair in 2012. And the airline slowly, a lot of skilled people apparently left over that period since 2012. It seemed governance, the Zondo Commission heard a bunch of testimony already about questionable things happening. And then there was an attempt roughly about 2017 when they brought in Mr. Vuyani Jahanov from the private sector to see if he could do a turnaround. He did compile a 5-year plan and wanted 5 billion rand for it, but he wasn't able to obtain it. And in about June 2019, he decided to go back to the private sector. And the airline also then ran into a bit of trouble. Its lenders didn't want to just, give out more money all the time. And the government also was not, I think, too keen or maybe not too able to do it at the time. They needed about 2 billion by, I think, about 20 November 2019. And they attempted to start a restructure program. But then some of the unions were not happy with that. I think they've, like NUMSA and the SA Cabin Crew Association, they've always said, why should the employees take the brunt if there was mismanagement of the airline? And so they start on a strike, and then Solidarity was actually going to take SAA, going to apply for SAA to be put in business rescue. But then a few days before they were going to do that, the government selected to actually voluntarily go into business rescue on the 5th of December 2019. Then since then, there was the business rescue process. It was going on. The business rescue practitioners, they cut some not profitable routes. And then, of course, the pandemic hit. And that was devastating to the whole airline industry. And SAA basically stopped flying except for some repatriation flights. And then the long process of trying to compile a business rescue plan was underway. There were a few attempts. Government said at some point that they didn't have the type of money that the business rescue practitioners felt was needed. But then finally, in the mini budget last year in October, the Treasury allocated 10.5 billion rand to implement the business rescue plan. And then, of course, after that, what happened was the DPE was also keen, and it claims that it has made that clear all along, to the business rescue practitioners that they also wanted to bring in SAA's subsidiaries, Mango, SAA Technical, and Air Chefs, that they also needed money. So from what I understand, the DP actually asked Treasury for 14 billion rand, but in the mini budget, they only got 10.5. So to get around the gap that sort of remained, the business rescue practitioners exited at the end of April, but with still about 3.5 billion rand still to be paid in terms of the plan over the next 3 years. So that's gone into a receivership, so-called receivership structure, to sort of leave SAA then without this historic debt. And yeah, that's sort of where we are now with SAA.
Okay, so the DPE announced this plan or this deal. We're not quite sure all of the mechanics, and I don't think even the parties that we spoke to are sure about exactly how this is all going to work. What we do know is that this Takatso consortium will get 51% of SAA, and they will pay 3 billion rand. But they're not paying 3 billion rand for a 51% stake of the company. What is the deal? How is the deal structured for it?
From what I understand, it's not like a sale. It was a dilution of the shareholding, because from what I understand, if it was a sale, then the money would have gone to the DPE. But it's not the DPE needing the money as shareholder; it's SAA. So they diluted it by then creating shares for a 51% share for the consortium. That's how I understand it. Yeah.
Right. And just to ask, so the consortium will be getting a debt-free airline. Is that your understanding?
They have said all along, from what I understand, that it's up to government to sort out the so-called legacy issues.
Right.
Yeah, those would include the SAA pilot deadlock and I presume then the receivership matters. Yeah.
Right. Okay,
not small matters, by the way.
Yes,
these are not small matters. Yeah.
I can imagine that. Right. So let's talk about the consortium. There are Gideon Novick, who's well known in the airline industry, is part of the consortium along with Global Airways. So talk a bit about both those parties. Who are they?
Yes. Okay. So Gideon Novick, he was actually, I think, co-founder of Kulula.com. So I think, kudos for him to sort of enter into the low-cost airline space like that. He was also with Discovery for a while, and then he co-founded South Africa's youngest airline, Lyft. I think they started operations in December 2020, operated by Global. Global has been a successful business all along. They do so-called wet leases. From what I understand, it's like they give you the full package. If an airline needs an airplane somewhere, they send you the plane, the crew, they maintain the plane, everything. So they have been very successful. And everybody I've spoken to in the industry have only had good things to say about Global and about Mr. Novick and their experience. Yeah.
Right. Ahmed, if I can move to you, the biggest part of what we understand is the biggest stakeholder in the consortium is an investment company called Harith. What can you tell me about what Harith does?
Okay, so when you talk about Harith, there are different incarnations of it, but to save everyone the hassle and confusion, we'll speak very broadly about Harith, which pretty much is the same thing. They're all pretty much the same thing. So they're a big name in infrastructure investment. They manage the Pan-African Infrastructure Development Fund. There's two of them, actually. The first one is a 15-year, $630 million fund, and the other one is a $435 million fund. And the investors into this fund are the Government Employees Pension Fund, so civil servants' money, ABSA, Old Mutual, a bunch of other institutions, I think a Ghanaian pension fund. And so what they do with this money is they try to put their fingers in different infrastructure pies around the continent. So whether it's energy, telecoms, transport, health. But more recently, they've turned their attention to aviation. They did try to acquire Comair recently, but that deal failed. They also tried to be part of venture to get SA Express. That also didn't work out. But now they've got a seat at the table with the big boys. And they're with DP and SAA, with probably the most recognizable airline in the country. So go big or go home, you know?
I mean, it is safe to say that Harith is quite controversial, going right back to its founding. Can you talk us a bit through its history?
So as much as it doesn't like to really talk about this, it's a child of the PIC, Public Investment Corporation. So for those who don't know, the Public Investment Corporation is a state-owned entity that by and large manages mostly the government employees' pensions funds and other funds, but it's just about 2 trillion rand worth of money. And Harith basically says it doesn't have this a good relationship at the moment with its parent, but the reality is that the PIC initially provided about 17 to 18 million rand seed money to get Harith going. This eventually reached about 22 million rand. And Tsepo Matluele, who was at the PIC at the time, this is when the PIC was basically becoming what it is now. Before that, it wasn't really a state-owned entity. It was more part of Treasury. Right? And he was there spearheading that Pan-African Infrastructure Development Funds. And his rationale for creating Harith was he said that private companies wouldn't want to invest in a fund that's being managed by the PIC because obviously it's government and they don't want to get involved with all of that. So he suggested it, and Harith was created outside the PIC as an entity outside it. He resigned at the time because, according to him, he was off to go do business with Mampela Rampela in Cape Town. But then apparently the PIC called him back saying, we really need you. The investors really want you. Please head up this Harith thing, you know. And he was appointed CEO. And Jabu Mulaketi, who was the deputy finance minister at the time, he was also the PIC chair at the time, was deployed to Harith. And he was eventually elected as Harith's chair. Now, this is a position he still occupies at the time, currently. So over the course of all of this, Matluele says there was a rift between him and PIC when the PIC decided he wanted to own Harith completely, 100%. And he says that all the investors, the private investors, threatened to walk because they really wanted him and they really wanted Harith to be this independent thing. And apparently the PIC capitulated. So despite all of this, and him saying that they have this relationship that has fractures, the Party Commission of Inquiry into the PIC found that this relationship was complicated and really needed to be investigated. It didn't mince words. It was quite scathing, basically saying that this whole approach in creating Harith and having him there and having Jabu Mulaketi there was giving them basically easy access to PIC funds and an ability to get to secure money from the GPF. It also says that they charged punitive rates to a lot of the investors, but specifically highlighted how it would impact the GPF. Harith itself says that these were industry standard rates and that all the private investors wouldn't have agreed to all of this if the fees were not standard rates. But given all of this, it does seem like there is a lot brewing behind the scenes in terms of Harith's history.
So one of the listeners or readers, Rusi, has asked, who are the funders of Harith apart from the PIC? So we know that the PIC owns 30% of Harith. They're not a funder in the sense that they're providing capital for this deal. But who else has a stake in Harith?
So by and large, Tsepo himself doesn't have a personal stake in it. Well, that's what he told me. But it seems like the employees of Harith own a portion of that. And historically, there were some banks that had a stake in it, partially some of the investors in the PIDF, into the Infrastructure Development Fund, your ABSAs and the like. At the moment, I'm not entirely sure what the structure is, because they haven't really said anything lately about how it's made up. But historically, it was 100% the PIC, and its different entities also had different varying levels of PIC involvement. So there is the PIC involvement, but by and large, it's the Harith staff and the Harith executives and a few other investment banks. So at the moment, I'm not entirely sure if they're still there.
Right. So Harith is, let's say Harith is an investment manager. It's not a bank. It doesn't have billions of rands to its at its fingertips. And there's some questions asked about how it will fund the 3 billion rand that it's sort of committed to SAA's future. What do we know about that?
So one of the things that everyone kind of latched onto when Minister Godan announced this whole deal with the consortium was this figure of 3 billion rand. So obviously the 3 billion rand is not the full price of that 51% stake that they're getting. This is an initial amount that they said that the consortium was going to put into it. So what Tsepo told me is that they don't necessarily have that 3 billion rand right now, because he says no one sits around waiting with 3 billion rand for an opportunity to buy an airline, But he says they do have a little bit of money to get things going. And I mean, look, they're saying they have the ability to raise the rest of this money over the course of the next 3 years, which is when they've committed that 3 billion rand. So the concerns around this were that the consortium didn't come to the SAA with cash in hand, saying, "Look, here's our money. Let's get this going." They did come with that initial money and that promise that they would raise more over the next 3 years. So Matlole says Harith is talking to some regional and international players and partners who want to play with them in terms of SAA, but he hasn't really named anyone yet. But by and large, Matlole built his name on sort of getting private investors. And I think that's what he's hinging all of this on. I mean, he's convinced with his previous experience with Harith and with his other company, Labashe, will kind of work in his stead. I mean, they've got stakes in EOH, the Lansere Airport. And Labashe, they put up R1 billion to buy Tiso Blackstar and turn it into Arena, which is the publisher now of Business Day and Sunday Times. And so he thinks all of that will be a feather in his cap when he tries to raise that money down the line. But the reality is they don't have 3 billion rand at the moment. They've got a little bit and they're convinced that they can raise that money. Whether or not that's a good or bad thing, that wholly depends on whether SAA can actually function with whatever they're going to put in as an initial amount.
Right, Rolf, I'm going to turn to you. In your view, is this a good deal for South African taxpayers?
Well, Helena, I've been worried about this kind of transactions about, I think, as far back as 2018, because my sense was that there was a heightened anti-corruption and the anxiety and the public dissatisfaction with bailing out state-owned entities was becoming quite a concern and higher. So it created an environment where it looks any way out will become acceptable. Like as long as the taxpayers don't have to bail out all of this, the story was beginning to frame itself in that way that my biggest comparison here, I remember as a researcher, I looked a lot at Russia, what happened to Russia around the 1990s. I mean, I had written stories around the oligarchs where I had looked at how the state-owned assets were actually gobbled by a few connected individuals when the Soviet Union was collapsing. And actually, they were not bought with money. They were evaluated very, very far less. Actually, my hypothesis was that what you do is that you get to pay something like this 3.2 billion, which it's not an evaluation of 51% of SAA. It's almost like something that worked out from the figure that came out from the business rescue, that you needed that cash and diluting all the ownership of the state within that. And my hypothesis far back, which I've written it, was that in situations such as this, people get an opportunity to pitch on deals such as this with very less money. And actually, but the value of what they're getting is so high that after a short while, you can just simply reevaluate your own stake and get money, or get money very cheaply in the market. I mean, if you show up and you say to me that somebody's asking you 3.2 billion to be a big player in South African Airways, I mean, if I have a bank, I will give you money. How did you get that stake? I mean, I know you're going to pay me back because there's a great deal of value lying there, which is not being brought into this transaction. What is being brought forth in this transaction, it is the idea that the taxpayers will no longer have to bail out this. But is this a good deal for South Africans? There is a lot that we don't know. We don't know if there has been an alternative offer. We don't know if someone else could have come up with, and we don't even know if there has even been competition. What we have been given was just the solution that you get scared when you feel that someone is going to pay this amount of money for that stake, and you know it's not a valuation of that. I mean, I had a friend of mine who worked in the bank calling me and saying to me that, yeah, I see you're concerned about this deal, but you got to know that it's not the evaluation of SAA 51%. These guys are going to go in and get them. And I said that there is no problem. It's not an evaluation, but it's not a fair deal in a sense that it actually undermines the value of South African Airways. And these types of deals, they tend to go to the usual suspect. I was so worried. I almost put in my article that you come to my house, you manage it, you run it down to the ground, you advise me that, Ralph, your house is no longer livable. Can you sell it to me at a discounted price? And I say, okay, I will sell it to you to go to a small apartment. And then you say, can you borrow me the money to pay for your house? You see, that's how I think about this deal, especially that Harith is in proximity with your PIC, and we're going to get into the game of valuations and so forth. And there is no transparency in this deal so far. Is it a good deal? I don't know. It doesn't look good. The lack of transparency points to something that is just already suspicious about that it cannot be a good deal. But my biggest concern has always been about selling state asset for scrap metal, working on the public indignation and anger against bailouts. That is what I think is setting in. And I've had a flag in raising these types of questions. Because I'm not a finance person, but I work for Treasury. I do understand this finance. I mean, you cannot just try to complicate a transaction with the purpose just to complicate it and then tell me it's complicated. I will not understand it. I find too many deliberate efforts in this not to lay bare what are the conditions, who has been brought in to consider being part of this, who is going to pay for this. Harith is saying that they don't have a problem raising this money. I don't know if the PIC will wake up the next day and say that, oh, wait a minute, I'm increasing my holding, Harith. I was owning 10%, 30%. I'm just going to add another 10% to that. Oh, that 10% of mine might just be coming at a cash of about 2 billion, which is conveniently needed. It's not about Harith getting this money. They can easily get them. I can go get that money if you give me the transactions such as that, or if you give to other people. It's not a fair deal at all. It doesn't look fair. It is difficult to even evaluate. I mean, I'm listening to Ahmed there. I've read a lot of his article around this thing. I've read a lot of work that the team have put together, you guys, on this. It's such an important deal to have such deficit when it comes to the material information about its character. It's too big to pass this way, in my view.
I think that is a valid question. I mean, we've been pressuring the government for some time to tell us we know but at least one big union also bid for SAA, and we've been pressuring government to find out who the list is, and they're saying due to confidentiality issues, they won't give us the list of contenders. The fact that there hasn't been outrage or lawsuits following the announcement of Harris does tell us that there's not a massive appetite out there to grab the stake. But I mean, Rolf, you mentioned something that's very interesting to me about this deal. It's basically a privatization. You know, a majority, the private sector consortium will own a majority of SAA. And still, while the deal has been controversial, the partners have been controversial, the privatization really hasn't. I mean, there hasn't been a massive outcry from the unions that we may have expected 2-3 years ago. Do you think there's been a shift in South Africa about this? Do you think people are just tired of the pandemic? You know, the economy is in such a bad state. What is the views on privatization?
I think that when it comes to privatization, there are concerns in certain quarters. Politically, there are political parties that we know stand against this, like your EFF, no doubt. They will not want this. The SACP, the alliance partners, they've not voiced any, they have not supported this. They've not shown any support to this, the alliance partners, even within the ANC. Does that, I mean, on average, do we see a shift in terms of the attitude or changes when it comes to the attitude towards privatization? I think that South Africans are placed in a moral dilemma, whereby you have to now say, as long as we rid the taxpayer of this burden, it happens through a compromised privatization transaction, quite questionable transaction. It looks as if for some it is fine. But I do think when the unions sit together, when the unions start to formulate their position, remember this was just announced. And I mean, Helena, I read the news every day. I remember, I think it is 3 or 4 months ago, there was something of this nature almost announced as if it was a joke. It was like SAA will be bought for, I think it was mentioned 4 billion or something like that. There was such kind of a mention in the news, and it almost fizzled out, like, you know, dismissed and almost as a joke. But I do think that now there has been an assessment of the mood towards privatization, and people are concerned about the pandemic. There is also fatigue about the level of scandals that you actually have, controversial transactions, ESCOM and so forth. The report coming out, it just creates a great deal of fatigue. I don't really think that people, though, are willing to allow the politically connected to get these assets at this price that I call scrap metal price, almost, because we don't even know. We don't even get a proper evaluation and so forth. I don't even know. I don't think that South Africans are in on letting this thing on scrap metal. And it's not just a choice between privatization and retaining things as they are. People also want some level of fairness around this. We've seen those who have followed the PIC, like UDM's Holomisa, they've spoken on this. Even if political parties such as the DA will support privatization, I think they will be concerned with this nature of transaction. As this thing become part of the discourse and the temper settle down, and maybe we focus, it looks as if a new view is coming out to say that, look, yes, privatization, yes, but it doesn't have to be this way. I mean, there are those who point to Elephant Consortium as a success, but there are those who are saying that it has been sold to Comrade who took out value out of it, because there are those who are saying that Telkom is not a great story, which is associated with the Elephant Consortium by then. So I think people are trying to find a way in which it can be fair, it can be at least an acceptable, fair deal with some level of transparency. So far, it's not satisfying this requirement. I don't really think that people are in on just taking anything that is being said to be privatization without interrogating it. I don't think so, although there is fatigue around some of these scandals.
A question, and I would invite anybody who's watching to post a question. I know a lot of us sound very technical, but somebody's asked, SAA hasn't turned a profit for over 10 years. There've been constant government bailouts, staff issues, COVID, corruption. Is it not too late to save SAA? Now, you're an expert in the airline industry. Is it too late? Should we just, what are the implications if we just shut the door?
I think that the other airlines will just fill the gap, whether it's internationally or domestically. I mean, remember, SAA has not flown commercially for more than a year now. Yet, when we reopened domestic domestic airlines, the other airlines started flying again, and so they will fill that gap. Yeah, I think.
You think there's still money to be made
with SAA?
Yeah. What is SAA's competitive advantage? What can it do what another airline can't do?
I don't know. I guess if it's really jacked up, it can. If it can, I think Mr. Novik, when I interviewed him recently, said these days with the aviation industry and the airline industry being changed because of COVID, airlines have to be flexible. They have to be able to respond quickly. And as an example, I can use Lyft again, because when Mango was grounded earlier this year, Lyft jumped in and help them out by providing a plane to bring it in at short notice to take over the Mango passengers. So it depends, and I think they're still busy looking at all these things. What will the model be for the new SAA?
Yeah, it was interesting from your story about Glow Airways that Lyft actually has a capacity of, or a passenger capacity at the moment of something like more than 80%, 83%, if I remember correctly. And that surprised me. It looks like Lyft is quite successful. Is that your impression as well?
Yes, when I first heard about the concept, when they launched it, I sort of thought this is very interesting because it's in a pandemic. You know, all airlines are battling. People aren't really flying that much, but they're doing their thing. They don't have a huge market share, but they're operating. They're doing okay for what they aim to do, I would say. And I think that's again the example of being able to be flexible. Yeah.
We just had another interesting question on the same thing, and I know that you've done some work in this regard. So we know that two of the parties in the new consortium are associated with this new airline, which will be direct competition for SAA. So what are the competition implications of this deal?
Well, about 3 years ago, the private airlines Airlink and SAF Air, which operates Fly SAF Air, they wanted to merge, and the Competition Commission wouldn't allow that. So when I actually put this to Mr. Novik recently, what about the competition issue? He did say the legal teams are looking into that, but in his view, and some other people that I've spoken to in the industry as well, they think because Lyft's share of the market is so small, and they even see SAA almost like a startup because it hasn't been operating for more than a year, that they don't think that it will be seen as a sort of something that would really fall under something that you shouldn't allow in terms of competition rules. But it would be interesting because SAA has Mango, which is a low-cost airline already. So what's going to happen to Mango, for instance? The DPE did say as part of the going forward, they will look into what they will do under the bigger umbrella with SAA, maybe Lyft and Mango. That's still a question mark.
But reading between the lines, if you look at what they told you, it does look that they look as if they may be willing to give up Lyft.
Maybe, yeah. I've also heard something that they not sort of seem not to be attached to it. Yeah.
Right. I made another question that we got, Mr. Novik, who's, as Clarence said, a very respected person in the airline industry. Daniel Fuchs asking if he's being used as a front for the politically connected elite to make this deal palatable.
Look, I know that the folks at Paris, especially Mr. Mafluele, has been trying to kind of push aside any association with the ruling party or with other cadres. But the reality is this: he went to university with Brian Molefe and Mcebisi Jonas. He's worked with these people. He's basically a part of their circles. And I mean, Brian Molefe is the one who recruited him into the PIC. So as much as he would like to think he's not politically connected, I'm not entirely convinced that he isn't. Whether or not this is a chance for the ANC to kind of get its fingers into the still, by and large, through the front of Mr. Novik. I can't say for sure, but I can say that Tsepo has a lot of associations with a lot of ANC people, a lot of high-up ANC people, a lot of powerful ANC people. He maintains it's because it's just the cost of doing business. He gets to meet all these interesting people, and along the way, this doesn't include the fact that he apparently sold his home to Brian Molefe for like then less than 40% of what that house was actually valued at. I mean, all of these things kind of seem above board. They seem legal. I think they kind of thrive in this gray area where things are not really political. They seem to be more on the business side of things, but I think they find a way to take advantage of falling through the cracks. And whether it's a purely political thing, I can't say for sure, because I don't want to put my own words. But who knows? This is South Africa. Who knows?
I think that brings us to what Rolf said about, the political connectedness of this and the comparison to Russia. So it's interesting. Rolf, I mean, the timing of this is very odd. So we had President Ramaphosa earlier this week saying that, a lot of diligence still needs to be done, and that the deal could still, and this was his own words, could still unravel. Why? And the DPE also told us that they're still busy with due diligence on this deal. They're still looking at Harith and the consortium. Why do you think they announced it? It feels like it was quite premature. What do you think about the way that the deal has been handled so far?
I mean, it's quite laughable to make a decision and announce it, and after the fact, try to sanitize it. And the irony here of sanitizers, try to sanitize the deal by trying to come up with some transparency, trying to account once the decision seems to have been made. I mean, once you made that announcement and it became clear to me that the big decisions have actually been made. It is just the technicalities of this that will then be structured. So I think government probably underestimated the public concern around the demand for transparency, that people will just demand transparency out of this. The idea that it potentially alleviate the taxpayer, well, good, but certainly we have seen this is not this. When I look at South Africa, I think the biggest risk, and that I've just been pointing out as I was studying corruption the last few years, 2018, the biggest risk that concerned me was mega transactions that involve these state-owned entities. That's where things are, a lot of action is going to be taking place. So I think government underestimated the public concern and the backlash that will come out from this. And where things are now, already this partner, Harith and partners, it's already controversial. I mean, the partner that has been cited that their proximity to the PIC give them access to money. And we know, I mean, we've been around about what happened at the PIC. It is the very same cycle, how the PIC closer to treasury, some of those individuals, when these decisions were made, the likes of Brian Molefe being as mentioned, it is difficult to try to sanitize this deal and make it look above board. I do think that announcing it before they could go into those details about it, about due diligence and so forth, it is just a deliberate effort to try to manage it as you go along. The timing very interesting, because it seems as if it is at the time that the public enterprise minister, under pressure as well, and at the same time, President Ramaphosa need to be seen doing something around the reforms. And you announce something as half-cooked as this, and you end up having to give statement that it actually could unravel. Again, it brings this lack of coherence in this administration. It's like we are improvising. We're going to try an idea. If it works, we push it through. If there is no serious pushback against this, we carry on. It's not a way to implement policy with implications on state-owned entities such as this. Government is quite cantankerous in managing this thing.
Karen, we had a question from a reader who's asking, what is, and this is probably an impossible question, what is SAA worth now? The DPE still has 49%, so isn't DPE's share worth more as a passive shareholder with this consortium? So, I mean, what are the buyers getting? What does SAA owe?
Not much, I think. So I think some people even think that it's worth nothing at the moment, because it doesn't really have any planes left. I mean, it has a few old planes. All the other planes were sent back to the lessors during the business rescue. Then one can ask, has its brand been damaged perhaps because of all the long drawn out business rescue, all the various media coverage, SAA being in the news, it's not getting off the ground. So it's a question mark. I think it's a question mark. Who knows what it's worth? I don't know.
Does it still own slots at airports?
It does. I think it still has some slots. I think it has that Heathrow slot. It let go already of its very valuable Heathrow slot, which it had for the direct flight from Cape Town. They gave that up. They sold that some years ago. So I'm sure they still have that, but I don't think it's like worth billions.
You spoke at length to Mr. Novik about their plans for SAA. Can you tell us a bit more about what the consortium is going to do with SAA? What is their focus going to be?
Yeah, from what I understood, he said there's still a lot of work to be done to actually decide what will be the best model. So I think from what I understand, again, it will be take into consideration SAA, take into consideration Mango, take into consideration presumably then Lyft as well, and look at what's going to be the best model. I think from what I understand, maybe originally they'll look at domestic and regional and not so much international to start off with. But he made it clear that there's a lot of, I can almost say like putting on the thinking caps still to be done about what would be actually the best routes, the best planes. He did mention that at the moment, because of the impact of the pandemic on the airline industry, in his view, it's now a good time to actually make deals with airplane lessors. But they'll have to decide all those things. So it seemed that there's a lot of work still to be done.
And we also have a question about whether Mango should shut down or merge with Lyft to create one low-cost airline under the SAA umbrella. What would your thoughts be on that?
I mean, maybe that would be one of the things they would look at in deciding what they want to do. I think there have also been opinions that I've heard in the past that said, let go of SAA and just keep Mango as the state airline. Let focus on Mango. Some people would think let go of Mango. So they would have to, I guess, make all their calculations and decide which is going to work better for whatever model they decide on.
Talk to us a bit about the problem that the consortium is now going to face in terms of the SAA pilots, who are still, most of them, still locked out of SAA. What is the situation there exactly?
Yes. So even I think after the announcement of the deal, the consortium has made it clear that all the legacy issues will be for government. So they're not taking over the pilot deal. They made that clear. But what the deal is that the members of the SA Pilot Association, they've been locked out by the then still business rescue practitioners since the 18th of December. They then, earlier this year, also went on strike because they wanted to prevent so-called scab labor from being used. Because the main thing is for the new SAA to take off, they need to have their pilots trained. And the SAPA members were the training pilots, from what the training pilots were SAPA members. So that's their deadlock at the moment. So there's some court cases. There's a ruling. We still await a ruling from the Labour Court where SAPA challenged the SAA Pilots Association. They challenged the lockout and the use of so-called scab labour. And they want certain payments that they feel are due to them.
Ralph, a question to you from one of our readers. Do you think, given your time at government and Treasury, do you think there's any chance that government will not meddle in the future operational management of SAA?
Well, the challenge is that as we are talking about this, I do not know what is the position of the ANC. And in terms of our system, the ANC is the one that deploys people to government. So the ANC, if you look at the ANC policy resolutions and so forth, the ANC has been discussing, I think last year, the nationalization of the Reserve Bank and so forth. So when you look at this move, such as this, and you look at the fact that it seems not to have that deep resonance or support within the party, or it is not sustained within the party, it creates an environment of uncertainty as to whether, to what extent will government be involved? Will it be meddling? The thing is that the ANC has not made it clear that control of state-owned assets is no longer its strategic focus. I mean, we say all we say around the issues. Remember what we are dealing with. We are dealing with a fiscal issue. Sometimes we deal with SAA and ESCOM from the fiscal point of view, from the idea that we cannot sustain it in terms of the fiscus and so forth. And those decisions that you made, such as getting rid of SAA, they are based on the reality that you just don't have money to keep on bailing it out. But still, that doesn't talk to where the ANC stand when it comes to their long-standing position that they see some of the state-owned entities as strategic areas where they can push their agenda, be it a transformation agenda and so forth. Until that is aligned well within the party, we will not know how the future looks like. Because the concern as well that I have is that if you push a deal such as this, which I think to a greater extent, it is the most practical thing you can do. You just have to do it transparently. I mean, I'm not against this. I need to be very clear. I just think it can be done better. It can be done more openly, much better. But if you push a deal like this based on the domination of individuals, based on the views of, for example, President Ramaphosa, for example, his allies such as Minister Pravin Gordhan, the challenge is that down the party, someone else is sent to the party, you have a different leadership, you start seeing a policy shift that talks to renationalization. I mean, if you look at some of the document of the ANC, it's quite strange. You see in some of the previous document, concerns are being raised about renationalizing Sasol, for example. Something that other people would have thought it's been sealed. So all of these things show that there is a great deal of uncertainty as to how the ANC-led government is going to relate to these entities, is going to meddle and to what extent, and in pursuit of which agenda, if that happens. The party need to be realigned so that at least it can be clear. Is the ANC going to accept that it is inevitable they are not going to control state-owned entity, the airline, for example? Has that position resonated well, or are there those within the ANC who harbor ideas that maybe the new leadership of the party, as they think about it, will bring back control of this asset. You never know, because these things are not sustained well within the party. It creates a great deal of unpredictability when it comes to where government will be. One only hope that practically government just will not have any money that allows it to meddle. But that is based on something that it's not really an expression of a clear, coherent agenda or clear policy direction.
Why the obsession with SAA? Why is it such a, Tito Mboweni, not a fan. Well, the vast majority of South Africans never probably fly on airlines. Why is SAA so key to the government psyche?
Back in 2010, when I was at Treasury, there was one Deputy Director General who once said that, look, SAA plays a bigger role when it comes to stabilizing the market. If you remove SAA, it is going to affect the aviation sector and so forth. Is that true? Does that continue to hold? I mean, I'm listening to Karen here even saying that, look, this thing is not even valued that much. So the obsession with this, with SAA, it's more of a sense of saying we need more leverage to exercise policy. I mean, Helena, if you take a step back, you look at how the governing party see its potential influence on policy. State-owned entities are being seen as areas where they have a bigger leverage. It's where a lot of money gets spent. But actually, the flip side of the coin is that is where the governing party actually get the most exposed. It actually incurred more political liability when it comes to state-owned entities than any other area of expenditure, to a point where one can say it can actually cost them the vote. So this obsession, there's always been this idea that you need a national airline and so forth. Can you sustain those ideas now? Do you really need that? If we need the so-called national flag carrier, in this integrated economy, does the nationalization or economic nationalization go to that point of nationalism? If we feel it, is it sound to actually make those arguments? It does no longer hold. The cost is just too high for people, for South Africans to continue to hold on to that. And I think we live in an integrated and global environment. We have survived for a long time without an efficient SAA, to a point where it becomes difficult to argue it plays that critical role. I've had people making that argument in the past, but I think that they might have changed their views from that. I think that there might be more willingness to just let go of this. Politically, though, it actually undermines the party's control. And each and every party want to control where the big expenditure is. Most political parties prefer to do that, despite their lack of capacity to manage things better.
Corin, we had a question on SAA's partnerships with Emirates and with Ethiopian Airlines. What happened to all of those when it went into business rescue?
Yeah, I think maybe there were some code shares, but like Emirates, I think. But with about Ethiopian, I know there were things written during the rescue process that Ethiopian wanted to come in maybe as a partner. Sorry, but from my understanding, and I think they even said that, they're on record as having said that they were never interested to be an equity partner. That they were interested in maybe helping out with running the airline. So it's not as if they had, this kind of partnership that SAA now has with the consortium. And just also about Ethiopian Airlines, all the aviation experts I've spoken to, they all agree that the success of Ethiopian is that although it's state-owned, they have aviation experts running it, and the state does not get involved in running. They let the aviation experts run the airline, although it's state-owned. That seems to be the consensus about Ethiopian in the industry.
Thanks, Corin. Ahmed, I want to close with you. As we heard, President Ramaphosa said that this deal is far from signed, a lot of due diligence still. What are the obstacles to get this through?
So in terms of that due diligence, Karen mentioned that we can't really ascertain how much SAA is actually worth. part of this whole deal is both sides looking at each other's books and saying, okay, how many assets SAA has, can Harith, on the other hand, and the consortium kind of get things going. And beyond that point, when government and the DPE specifically are going to be looking into Harith, it's very likely that its relationship with the PIC and the adverse findings against it by the Party Commission are going to come into play. I mean, a lot of those findings are black and white. And the PIC says it's busy recommending the commission, busy implementing the commission's recommendations, basically that there should be a probe into that relationship, though the 6-month deadline for that has come and gone. So while that probe seems to be either starting or ongoing, the PIC itself doesn't seem to be entirely sure. If that investigation concurs with the Party Commission's findings, then Harith is in trouble, because since they're the key stakeholder in the consortium, and then it possibly all could come tumbling down. I don't necessarily think that will completely be game over for the consortium, because I think Harith will probably, if that does happen, will probably review those adverse findings in court. But speaking more specifically about the courts, UDM's Bantu Holomisa, who we mentioned earlier, has kind of been the Harith antagonist throughout in most recent times. He has a history of speaking his mind about Harith. Obviously, he has an interdict from defaming them, but he has specifically said that his party is going to be challenging Harith's inclusion in the consortium. So given that and in whatever will come out of that case, I think also that House of Cards still could come tumbling down if things go against Harith and the consortium by proxy.
I think that brings our discussion to a close. I want to thank all of you for participating. I want to definitely thank everybody who's at home and in the cold. Please stay safe. Please stay warm. As you heard from Ame just now, a lot is still up in the air, except for SAA, which is not up in the air at the moment. But we hope to bring you the best and the latest analysis on this deal as it unfolds. Thank you very much for joining us tonight, and we'll see you again. Thanks, Rolf.
Thank you. Thanks, Tim. Thank you. Thanks, colleagues.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.